Hello, everybody. I'm here to introduce our speaker tonight. So, a civil engineer by profession, Hannah Vickers was recently appointed Chief Executive of the Association for Consulting and Engineering, ACE, joining from the Institution of Civil Engineers. Prior to this, she was headhunted by Infrastructure UK, the Treasury, where she was responsible for advising senior ministers on infrastructure and leading their initiation route map team, building confidence and demonstrating value for money in major projects including HS2, Crossrail 2, and the development of the Olympic Park in London. She joined infrastructure after 10 years at the Environment Agency, where she worked in a number of different roles. Please join me in welcoming Hannah to the stage to talk about what a changing industry means for the media.
So I'm as Harriet says, I'm the Chief Executive for the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. A little bit of background on ourselves. So for those of you who don't know us, we're the Business Association for Consultants, large and small. We represent about 450 companies who design, deliver and build our social and economic infrastructure and built environment. Much like the amazing built environment I have behind me this evening. So we're going to have a great time here tonight. I'm really looking forward to the awards. I'm really looking forward to celebrating the brilliant work that you do in this industry. And I'm just going to say a few words first about why I think you're so important. So all of you in the room have a vital role to play in helping to explain this to our stakeholders about why engineers are so important and why we're so valuable. We definitely need your help. All I can say this as an engineer by profession is that we're not always the easiest people to work with, so please bear with us and thank you for your patience. We're really not natural communicators, you might have noticed, and we don't always shout about what we do from the rooftops. We're probably far more interesting in explaining the technical details and specifications of exciting things like bridges and reinforced concrete design, without completely missing the fact that this will radically change the lives of those who will use the infrastructure that we create. So this is absolutely why we need your help and why we need to work in partnership with you to get our stories out. As you already know, we're facing unprecedented change and our industry is on a brink of huge upheaval. And all of this will have major impacts to the work that you do alongside the day job that we do ourselves. So before I get started, I'm going to contrast our two industries later on. But before I get started, I've been asked to, with my background, give you a little bit of insight, hopefully, on some of the major issues facing the sector at the moment. So as Harriet said, I joined ACE from the Institution of Civil Engineers. I was only there for a year, so those of you that will know Mark Hansford will know that a year is plenty long enough in that role with a close working relationship with him, which I'm sure Tom will attest to as well. At the IC, I led the work on Project 13, so I wrote the commercial handbook and the blueprints, trying to set out, from an industry perspective, how we think the clients could operate and work and structure themselves in a different way and perhaps be a little more collaborative. Before that, as Harriet said, I was in Her Majesty's Treasury. I had the benefit of working with two chancellors, so I worked with both George Osborne and Philip Hammond. You can imagine how different those two were. But it was a great time to be in Infrastructure UK. It was a great time to be in Treasury. They were both, in their own ways, hugely enthusiastic about infrastructure and the built environment. So based on that, I'll be sharing Chatham House, if I can dare say that in a room full of journalists. But I'll be giving you some perspectives on three things this evening. So I'll talk a little bit, if I can, about Brexit. Although I will say my speech was censored to exclude the word gammon, wasn't it, James? I'll also talk about the spending review and a little bit on the industrial strategy. So Brexit. Unsurprisingly, this is the section of my speech that has been rewritten the most times over the last few weeks, even the last few days. So I won't dare to try and give you an overview of the current situation. But needless to say, there are a few things that I think we should all be bearing in mind as we head towards what may or may not be a final determination. I think we've certainly, we'll see that we've got a huge challenge in this industry with skills. And actually, whatever we end up with and however we end our negotiations with the EU, we certainly need to think about what is realistic in terms of a transition period towards the sort of future skills profile that we need. What I can say is that there's no parliamentary majority at the moment for any of the options on the table, so it's going to make the period between now and Christmas hugely interesting for all of those of you who have a political bent. But equally, I'm slightly unnerved that there's probably no majority in the general public either for any of the options currently on the table. So it does leave us in a conundrum. And this delay and uncertainty, as you're all aware and have been frequently reporting, is actually hugely damaging to business and the businesses I represent. So if we need to say anything, we need to try to make sure our voices are heard at this, whatever the outcome, but the uncertainty that we have at the moment is really not how we can continue for much longer. Brexit is actually the reason that I left government. So I was in Treasury on the day of the referendum, and the day afterwards was like a no man's land with the disappointment from the civil service. But equally, I knew at that point that actually all of the effort and energy of the civil service would be purely directed towards managing Brexit, which is why I left the government myself. And that has come to fruition. We now see every department being almost entirely consumed with the detailed Brexit legislation, which again must make your jobs quite dull to be reporting on it. So my message to government is clear. The current state of limbo is no good for business or our industry, and I would hope that you would join me in making sure that they hear that message. Regardless of where we do end up with Brexit, let's move to something slightly more positive and uplifting. We're absolutely going to have a spending review next year, whether that is the existing government who are committed to a spending review next year or a new government. And in that, we will also have the redetermination of the regulatory settlements. This will be hotly contested. I think this will be a really interesting time. And again, you're going to need to get to work in terms of bringing some of the interesting stories there to the fore. It's going to be hugely hotly contested when you think about the balancing act that HMT has to do, and having been in there for a spending review is absolutely a balancing act, where we've got the huge public pressure at the moment around spending on health, social care, affordable housing. And sometimes our infrastructure and our built environment is the less visible economic enabler, so we really need to think about how we can make a voice for them. It's important that we back the National Infrastructure Commission and their campaign to put the National Infrastructure Assessment recommendations into practice as part of the spending review, whilst also guarding against the temptation by ministers to announce over-ambitious cost envelopes and delivery timescales that are probably undeliverable. I don't want to mention any names, but I think over recent years we've seen some fantastic examples of where perhaps my old boss, George Osborne, in his high-vis jacket got a little over-enthusiastic. So finally, to the industrial strategy. I would describe this, again, completely Chatham House, please, but I would describe this as the policy equivalent of a blast from the past, perhaps a greatest hits album where the government can roll out a whole load of buzzwords and exciting ambitions without much detail behind it. But I think actually if you were looking at this from a different perspective, maybe if, dare I say it, you were looking at this as if you were Donald Trump and approaching a deal, you might take a different view. Because for once, industry, as a government, has put money and the commitment behind engagement with industry. So again, if you were looking at this as a deal, you might see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for industry to take the initiative and renegotiate the boundaries between the public and private sector with government. It's a positive spin on it there. And I hope this is where we can get the Construction Leadership Council too. I think there's really incumbent on all of us to try to support them in this. So enough about politics. I'm now going to have a go at contrasting our two industries. I did a bit of research tonight, which was very interesting. So I'd like to turn the clock back a few years and explore how your industry has changed and what I've learnt about it in reading about what you do. So if you can cast your minds back to how you used to report, perhaps many of you here will remember how you started out in the industry. You may have started out writing for a weekly or a monthly magazine. Today you're still doing so, but on top of that, you're also updating your website with the latest news headlines on a daily basis, writing email newsletters, presenting and producing podcasts, live tweeting major policy announcements and doing up-to-the-minute news information, editing opinion pieces which reflect on the day's news, producing industry events and conferences and engagement forums, and perhaps even occasionally leaving the office to interview people. And just considering all of that additional work, you're doing it all for no extra money. Perhaps this new prism means you're reaching far more people than you could ever have dreamed of. Your content is on the web, you're searchable for years to come. You live on forever in history. And people who are reading your work on their way back from the office or on the phone makes you so much more accessible, valuable to your readers than you could ever have initially imagined. This changing model and the demands of your readers have made it difficult to find the business models that work for you, but you've come through that transformation. The media industry has spent the last few years experimenting with advertising, Kickstarters, subscription or non-subscription models, and sponsored content. Often at times taking 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, searching for a mix that works for your readers. But I think you've now emerged from this initial disruption that the internet brought you and have seized the opportunities. From all of this, you've emerged bruised and battered, but ultimately stronger and more relevant than ever before, with a much greater audience. If you think about where I stand now in construction, we're in a very much similar place to you were a few years ago. The way we work will be changing. Off-site construction, digital-enabled manufacturing, whole-life asset performance, data and AI will affect construction in the same way, with the same level of disruption that the internet brought to your magazines and newspapers. Like you, we will need to move, change and adapt, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and collectively search for the ways to seize the opportunities offered by this disruption to make us a modern and productive industry. So what does the changing construction industry mean for your work? Well, as I've just said, you're a few years ahead of us. So, for example, some of the things I think we're going to expect to see in construction over the next few years. We're going to see blurring of the boundaries between the traditional businesses of clients, consultants and contractors. Particularly in consultancy, I think we're going to be selling time. Instead of selling time, we're going to sell a combination of products and outcomes, which will be an absolute transformation for our businesses and all the incentives that brings with it. We're going to need to understand the way that digital capability will become integral to companies winning bids or not winning bids, and what that does to disrupt the marketplace. And finally, off-site construction will mean that we can actually deliver with confidence and on time. And in addition to what we can do for solving the UK's housing crisis through that, if you think about the opportunity that offers for overseas, perhaps completely redefining the way that we might give aid to other countries if we get that right. It's going to mean more collaboration for us. It's going to mean different people entering the sector, but all of this you know. In order for us to seize the opportunities here, we need to create a vibrant and attractive place to work. There's going to be a lot more of the digital natives of the millennial generation coming into our workplace. And this will create a more diverse workplace and perhaps an awful lot different from the construction industry we see today. I think I can stand before you as someone who has probably had first-hand experience of that, being profoundly dyslexic and a woman and an engineer, which is not often all in the same space. And I'd just like to push the challenge back to you now, because you have as the media, have a role to play in helping us make our way through this transformation. I think my challenge to you is to reach out beyond your traditional spokespeople to find the thought leaders of tomorrow. Perhaps they're people completing an apprenticeship. They're almost certainly not the ones making the decisions to sponsor your awards or pay for your advertising, which may in itself pose you a challenge. They're probably female. They might even be working outside the industry at the moment, perhaps in something like a tech startup. Almost certainly they will have travelled different paths to the traditional routes that we've had for those coming into our industry. I think you already appreciate how this will radically change your audiences, but also how they consume content. In many ways, you're ahead of construction. So as I said before, we need to work together on this. I need your help in my position as the Chief Exec of the ACE. Something I've described in terms of the transformation and what we're doing about it. So we've recently launched our Future Consultancy campaign. This will aim to help all of our members, large and small, adapt to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities offered by this new world. I'm going to share more details in due course, as I would say, in a room full of journalists. But I just wanted to put that on your radar because it's something that I think is going to be presenting real opportunities for the media over the next 12 months. I'm quite ambitious about this campaign. In all honesty, it's the reason I came out of government, to do something interesting where I thought there was the chance for industry to take the initiative. So in doing that, we're going to be reviewing consultancy as a whole, looking at everything from our industry partnership to our contracts, to ensure that we're fit for the current and future purpose and all the opportunities we could be delivering to clients that we aren't yet there with. But there are other ways you can help too. Within ACE, we have our Progress Network. I've already alluded to the importance of emerging professionals, but we have 1,000 future leaders and the leaders of tomorrow in that network. They are the experts, commentators, And on a purely statistical level, if you were looking for readership numbers, they're going to be the next generation that will form part of this industry for the next 2 to 3 decades. So I would ask that you engage with them now, and they will give you a new, unique insight into the issues affecting our industry and how your publications can remain relevant in future. So I'm sure you've almost heard enough from me and want to get back to celebrating. I'll just finish on this thought. Your experiences of radical change and disruption will be key to helping our industry through the difficult years ahead. You've been through this. We're yet to start properly. There will be instances where perhaps not making as much sense as we used to, although you might disagree that we never made any sense, where we're still dealing with conflicting ideas ourselves, still transitioning our businesses, and actually quite unsure of ourselves. So in that, all I ask is that you help us by remembering how you dealt with the radical change and recognise in a human way that actually this is our time to be in a similar situation. I think your experiences will mean that you should be well placed and probably one step ahead of us to seize the opportunities here and certainly keep yourselves relevant. So I'll just leave you with a thought and a final quote from a hero of mine, Alan Turing. So sometimes it's the people that no one can imagine anything of that do the things that no one can imagine. So my challenge to all of you in the room is to find them. Find the people that no one can imagine anything of, seek them out, give them a voice to challenge and transform our industry and drag us into the 21st century. Thank you all for listening to me this evening. Best of luck and congratulations to all the nominees tonight, and I look forward to handing out the awards. Thank you.